You're listening to Inside Israel Today with Gil Hoffman on the Land of Israel Network.
Hello and welcome to Inside Israel Today on the Land of Israel Network, on the landofisrael.com, where it's a Monday here, which means it is now the end of the second week of our Israeli election. The Israeli election was initiated by Netanyahu 2 weeks ago, and since then we've been jam-packed with news and exciting political developments. Exciting political developments and political developments billed as exciting that don't turn out to be so exciting. So far, the biggest developments have been not parties combining and uniting like we thought we would see, but parties crumbling and fighting each other. So we had the breakup first of the Bayit Yehudi party, the party of Naftali Bennett and Ayelet Shaked, until a week and a half ago, that when they left and formed the New Right Party, leaving the Bayit Yehudi party behind. And we had the breakup of the Zionist Union Party of Abi Gabay and Tzipi Livni, who will now be running separately. And we have not yet had that big attempt to unite behind an alternative to Netanyahu. Benny Ganz, the former chief of staff of the IDF, who has the best chance of doing that, not only has not taken operative steps since forming his party, he has not yet even said anything. A couple times we thought he was going to say stuff. On Saturday night, there was a vicious attack on him by Yoav Gallant, the new recruit of the Likud party, who said that Benny Ganz is being silent because of something he did or knew about. Something perhaps that happened when he was the chief of staff of the IDF in what's called the bore, the hole, the command center of the IDF. So we thought, okay, we're going to see a response from Benny Ganz to this. And what was said was the people of Israel deserve a different kind of discourse that's more statesmanlike and a different kind of leadership. Okay, not a very big statement, but better than nothing, except that 45 minutes later, we got a statement from the party saying, Benny Ganz didn't say that. That is the response of the party, not of him. Then we thought last night, after Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu issued a scathing attack on the legal establishment, we thought Benny Ganz is going to say something. And our phones went off with a message from the spokeswoman of Benny Ganz, who said the time has come for leadership that deals with the citizens of Israel and not with themselves. But that statement also came from the party, not from Benny Ganz. What have we heard from Ganz himself? Well, Ganz himself has spoken 3 times over the last 2 weeks or so. The first time he spoke was when Amos Oz died. And so we got a statement December 28th from Benny Oz who died, from Benny Ganz himself, eulogizing Amos Oz. The second time that he spoke came the following day, when the Israel Prize-winning IDF officer who has taken care of lone soldiers named Tzvika Levy died, and Benny Ganz put out a nice eulogy for him. And then yesterday, Benny Ganz spoke again in his name when Moshe Aarons, the former defense minister, yes, you guessed it right, also happened to die. That is the only thing Mr. Benny Ganz has done since entering politics. He has responded to deaths. Now, presumably, he will say something eventually, not just say, look at my pretty blue eyes. We're going to continue waiting until that happens. That is an interesting political strategy, to not say anything. Perhaps it can be effective. When you don't say anything, no one can disagree with you. What are the strategies of the other parties? Well, we see how the New Right Party of Naftali Bennett and Ayelet Shaked will be presenting itself as the only sane party on the right, not extreme like the party they left behind, not particularly religious, not having to listen to rabbis, but not the kind of party that will make concessions as the Likud might make to Donald Trump when his peace plan comes out. We've seen the strategy of Avi Gabai in the Labour Party is to focus on Avi Gabai, to say, isn't he a great guy? He was born with nothing. He made a lot of money. He has a nice story. And to say that he, unlike Benny Ganz, for instance, would not join a government led by Netanyahu. At this moment, I'm still waiting to hear the strategy of Yair Lapid. He has a big event tonight in Hebrew. He has another event on Sunday in English, and it's wonderful. The parties that are reaching out to the English speakers. One party that we're waiting to hear the strategy of is, of course, the Likud party of Netanyahu, but all indications is that the strategy will be to run against the Attorney General. Look, Netanyahu doesn't have any immediate competition. His party gets 30 seats in the polls. No other party gets more than 14. In the past, when he didn't have serious competition, he had to build up competition. That happened in the 2013 election when he basically ran against Barack Obama. And that happened in the 2015 election when he played up the candidacy of Isaac Herzog and Tzipi Livni against him by using the slogan, "It's us or them." Until then, it wasn't really clear if there would be any real competition, but Netanyahu strengthened his competition because he was afraid that if he doesn't do that, if there's not a serious threat to him, then voters on the right will vote for the Likud satellite parties. But if there is serious competition, then people will say, I guess I can't afford to vote for Bayit Yehudi or Shas or Kulanu. I have to vote for Netanyahu and strengthen him, or we might have a left-wing prime minister. And so who is his competition this time around? It's the Attorney-General Avichai Mandelblit, who is proceeding with 3 criminal investigations against Netanyahu. Case 1000, the expensive gift affair, where Netanyahu received expensive cigars, pink champagne, and jewelry from a rich Hollywood producer in return for Netanyahu helping that Hollywood producer sell a television station in Israel that was worthless for a lot of money to one of the richest Jews in the world. Case 2000, the newspaper collusion affair of Netanyahu meeting with the publisher of the second largest paper in Israel and telling him, if you make your paper less anti-me, I'll get the first largest circulation paper to come out less often. Yisrael Hayom, the very pro-Netanyahu paper. And case 4000, the Bezek Walla affair, where Netanyahu is accused of helping a rich cable company, phone company owner continue to own both companies while Netanyahu was communications minister in return for positive coverage on a news website that he also happened to own. The police and the prosecution have recommended bribery charges against Netanyahu in at least 2 of the cases. The police in all 3, the prosecution in at least 2. And we're waiting to see what the Attorney General is going to decide. Already next month, there's expected to be an indictment pending a hearing. And what Netanyahu has been saying is that's not fair. That indictment would be leaked to the press. Those are the accusations against me. The hearing is my side of the story. That has to happen before the election too. And it's apparently not going to happen. And so Netanyahu is using this to rally his base of supporters against the Attorney General and the legal establishment. And so last night, he called not a press conference. A press conference is when the reporters are allowed to ask questions. But he announced that he'd be making a statement that was fed live to the media. And the Likud spokesman said it would be a dramatic statement. We had no idea what it was going to be about. And it turned out to be Netanyahu speaking about his cases. In order to understand why Netanyahu is doing this, and if this could benefit him in any way, really to understand what the Likud is doing at all in this election, you don't need me. You don't need a political analyst. You need a lawyer. you need a legal analyst. And that's why we have coming up after the break the Jerusalem Post legal correspondent and a brilliant legal mind, Yonah Jeremy Bob. So stay with us.
This week on Israel Uncensored with Josh Haston, an exclusive interview with Ambassador Yoram Ettinger.
Israel's control of the Golan Heights is critical for America's interests, and it's time that we, at least in Israel, realize that the U.S. does conduct its affairs based on its own interests, not somebody else's interest.
That's Israel Uncensored with Josh Haston on the Land of Israel Network at thelandofisrael.com.
And we're back here on Inside Israel Today on the Land of Israel Network, on the landofisrael.com. Where in the first half of our show, we talked about the strategy of the different parties. And I said, well, when it comes to the Likud, in order to understand what Netanyahu is doing, you have to be a lawyer and a legal expert. And that's why we have on our line today a lawyer and a legal expert, Yonah Jeremy Bob, the legal analyst and correspondent of the Jerusalem Post, and an ordained lawyer himself. Yonah, thank you for coming on our show.
Glad to be here.
Okay, so with the Attorney-General being the political opponent of the Prime Minister in this race, is this a smart thing for the Prime Minister to do?
I mean, there's, two ways to look at it. There's the politics and the law. The politics, maybe it is. The people in his base might like this, and if that's all he needs to win the election, maybe it works for him politically. From a legal perspective, it's a huge mistake because to the extent that, there's three different cases. Some of them are very clear. Some of them are borderline. And when something's borderline, some of it's a certain amount of art, less than science. And to the extent he has goodwill from Avichai Mandelblit, the Attorney General, because they worked together for many years, both when Mandelblit was the chief lawyer in the army, when Mandelblit was his cabinet secretary, and even as the Attorney General, they worked together quite often. He is poisoning whatever goodwill he might have that could help him on a borderline call.
And the Attorney General is the man who's going to decide whether the Prime Minister is going to be indicted on bribery charges that have jail time, or just on lesser charges where he could get away with it, or at least just be fined or some other lesser kind of sentence. So let's go into what exactly happened yesterday. So we received, us political correspondents, a message at around 4:50 saying that the Prime Minister is going to deliver a dramatic statement at 8 o'clock at night. And then the speculation began. Some people thought he might quit or suspend himself. Some people thought he might fire some ministers. Some people thought he might be joining the Likud together to another party to run in the election. One of the radio hosts just said on the radio that she was convinced he was going to announce that he was breaking up from his wife. Okay, that's a little far out, but it turned out that the reason that we had this dramatic address that was broadcast live on all three channels except one cut him off in the middle was to announce that he had requested to debate the state witnesses against him and had been refused by the prosecution. Is that a legitimate request, Yonah Bob, to be able to debate Nir Chefetz and Shlomo Filber and Ari Hero, the state witnesses against him?
Okay, so there's two separate things the Prime Minister said. One was debating them on live reality television, aired live. That's not legitimate at all. The whole purpose of a confrontation is to gather evidence, which you could then submit in a court of law. You're not going to be able to submit evidence from a confrontation which is aired live. The second question is a little bit, slightly harder, although not that hard a legal question, is, should the police and the Attorney General have allowed him to confront those witnesses privately, at the police station? And to understand this, you need to understand that generally, when a confrontation is used, it's used by the police to gather evidence against the suspect, against the defendant, which in this case would be Netanyahu. Meaning, Netanyahu and any defendant has a right to refuse to confront their accusers. He has a right to refuse it, but he doesn't have any right per se to demand a confrontation. It's a tool the police use to collect evidence. He can refuse it, but not demand it. Now, that doesn't mean
it's a tool of the prosecution, not the right of a suspect.
Exactly. Now, that doesn't mean that in this case, maybe the police or the Attorney General, knowing the stakes, if he did make those requests, maybe they should have granted it. What I understand from law enforcement is it was so hard to pin down the Prime Minister getting to question him if he gave them, one 4-hour interview every couple months, that they needed all of that time to question him. And, if he had been more amenable in his schedule, maybe they would have fit in a confrontation. But again, the main point is, at least from a legal perspective, is he doesn't have a right to it. It's something that law enforcement uses. The only right he would have would be to refuse a confrontation if he didn't want to do it.
Okay, so let's go through the timetable of what's expected. When do we think the indictment pending a hearing will happen?
So I believe that the what I like to call the announcement of an intent to indict pending a hearing will be in February. I think it is quite possible with the continuous attack on the Attorney General from people in the Likud, from Netanyahu himself, if you want to say last night, he never directly attacked Mandelblit quite the same way that he attacked the police chief, Roni al-Sheikh, but let's say by implication it was pretty clear. Mandelblit may decide it sooner. He may, if the decision was going to be the end of February, he may say, okay, everybody's taking the gloves off. There's no one's going to give me any more points. We're taking a couple more weeks thinking about this. Might as well get it out of the way sooner. So you might see it in earlier February instead of later February. And then on election day, people will decide, based on the allegations they have, does that affect what they think of the Prime Minister? What is not going to happen is the actual pre-indictment hearing between Netanyahu's lawyers and Mandelblit. That is not going to happen until after Election Day, probably a month or two at least after Election Day, maybe multiple months after. It could be even 6 months from now. And then the final point in all that timetable is 3 to 6 months after that, the final decision on the indictment. Now, I want to qualify all of this. It is possible, people thought last night that the Prime Minister might say, I want things to move faster so I can get this cloud off of me. Maybe once Mandelblit makes his announcement, or once Netanyahu, if he wins election again, may say, all right, I want to get rid of this cloud fast, expedite the pre-indictment hearing, expedite your final indictment decision, so that if we have to, go to trial, we can do it sooner. Avigdor Lieberman did that, but Avigdor Lieberman also resigned as foreign minister. So anyway, all of those things are possible. The timeline could take a year to the final indictment, or Netanyahu could make it move faster.
Okay, so let's put that into a political timetable for our listeners over here on Inside Israel Today. So if the pre-hearing indictment is issued next month in February, before the 21st of February, if it's taken very seriously, all these charges that would be revealed against the Prime Minister, then technically someone in Likud, perhaps even the person who wins the February 5th primary for the second slot on the Likud list, could say, maybe we shouldn't run with the Prime Minister. We have until the 21st of February to submit the party's list to the Central Elections Committee. Maybe we would do better with somebody that doesn't have this cloud of criminal charges hanging over his head. And maybe between now and then, the Supreme Court or whoever in the legal establishment could leak that the Prime Minister's time, even if he gets reelected, would be limited, because even if the hearing comes out in which Netanyahu defends himself during the formation of the government. 6 months later, the actual indictment would come out, and then Netanyahu might not have 61 Knesset members who are willing to sit under an indicted prime minister. And then the government would fall apart and either require the Likud to submit a new leader or give a chance to the leader of another party to form a government, or we would have to face yet another election for Knesset, which would be very expensive for the taxpayers and very annoying. So that is the legal timetable and the political timetable as they meet up together. I guess my last question for you, Yonah, would be, as in any democracy, a leader is innocent until proven guilty. And I know my Twitter feed is full of people complaining and saying the Jerusalem Post is anti-Netanyahu and we're not giving him a chance and maybe he'll go off scot-free. Is there really still a chance that Netanyahu won't be charged in any of the three cases, or would be in a court of law declared totally clean?
Based on my sources, which I find at the highest levels of credibility about the indictment, I'm nearly certain that he will be indicted for bribery in case 4000, the Bezek-Walla affair, and at least for breach of trust in case 1000, the legal gifts affair. Case 2000, I think, is still a wild card that Mandelblit will be deciding at the last moment, and I'm sure if things get held up a couple extra weeks, that'll be the main reason. What a court will actually decide is a whole another issue. We have to remember that Ehud Olmert won his initial trial, and if the Holy Land case hadn't come along, which ended up turning Shula Zaken, he actually would have gotten off completely, basically, and might have returned to politics. So what happens in a court of law once you put the best defense lawyers in the game there, and the state's witnesses do have to be in public, under the public eye. Netanyahu will get a chance to publicly confront the witnesses that have turned against him in a court of law if it comes to that. Nobody knows. But in terms of an indictment, I'm fairly certain.
Okay, listeners, you heard it from a legal expert. And just to add the opinion of another legal expert, Channel 1's Moti Gilad said this morning that case 2000, which Yonah just said is the least big of the three, he said is the most big of the three. So anything can happen in the world of Israeli politics, and anything can happen in these legal developments as well, but it's not looking very good for the Prime Minister. Yonah, thank you so much for coming here on Inside Israel today.
Thank you.
Okay, listeners, this has been another fun show in the world of Israeli politics. Stay with us. Next week, there will be another fun and exciting show from Inside Israel Today. Bye-bye.
To make war upon rebellion is messy and slow, says T.E. Lawrence, like eating soup with a knife. Now I admit, I find life messy, but I never seem to feel that it's slow. I'm Rav Mike Foyer, and this is The Jewish Story.
Join Rav Mike Foyer for the best Jewish history podcast, The Jewish Story, on the Land of Israel Network at thelandofisrael.org.